Hi, everybody. My name is Wes, and I'm an alcoholic. Try to get this adjusted here a little bit. So, how this came to be was a number of years ago, gosh, probably 18 years ago, I was sponsoring a couple guys up at the hall. It used to be a treatment center up at Sojo, and then another guy asked me to sponsor him, and then another one. So it was like four guys that I was going to take through the steps. So I said, well, why don't we just all four meet as a group, and we'll go through the big book. And they said, okay, that's fine. So we set up for a Monday night at 7:30 to meet, and the next thing I know, the treatment center made the meeting mandatory for all the guys in treatment. So the next thing I know, there's 20, 25 people in this meeting, and it's not a regular meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in the typical sense. It's a presentation on the big book is kind of what it developed into. And that came about from a experience that I had probably 30, 35 years ago. There was a man named Wesley Parrish from Pompano Beach, Florida, that did a big book presentation. And he did it over the course of 3 days. It was a seminar. And, well, 2 days or 3 days, I can't remember. But he went through the first 164 pages of the big book. And it was so engaging and so enlightening and such a powerful thing for me that I've tried to take some of what he shared with me and adopted that in this meeting that I did for the guys up at the hall. We called it the Big Book with Wes, and that's fine. I'm no scholar. I don't know any more probably than a lot of other people. In fact, there's a lot of people that are good scholars that know the history of Alcoholics Anonymous in a way that I never will. But I love the history of AA, and I'll share some of that with you along the way. What this does is I'm going to start in the very beginning of the big book, and I'm going to read through the entire 164 pages is what we're going to do over the course of the next, I don't know, maybe 16 weeks. And what I'm going to do is try to present it in a manner that brings it to light. The big book was written somewhat archaically. It was written by men that were educated in, 1890, some of them, 1900. I mean, the book was written in 35, or published in 35, right? So it was written in a style and a manner that was very specific to that time. And so in that, understanding concepts and ideas depends upon your ability to understand the words and the meanings of the words. You can't convey an idea and understand an idea if you don't understand the meaning of the word. And some of the writing was difficult. It's archaic in a way. So my job and what I am going to try to do is to try to bring it to light, to compare it to things that are current, that are today, to help you relate to it better. So we're going to start in the very beginning of the book. And in the very beginning, on the first page, it says Alcoholics Anonymous. The next page says Alcoholics Anonymous a little larger. And I want to ask you a question. So here's my question. Are you recovered? Are you recovering? What are you? Does anybody have an opinion about what you are? Huh? Recovering? Can't be recovered, can you?
I feel that I'm recovered.
Okay.
He talks about that in the very beginning, and I had an issue with that word at first.
Okay, so Kyle says that he had an issue with that word at first, and it's his belief and opinion that he is a recovered alcoholic. Well, let's read what the book says. How's that? The book says, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how thousands of men and women have what?
Recovered.
Huh? Say it again.
Recovered.
Recovered from what? Alcoholism. That's a bold statement, ain't it? Huh? It doesn't say recovering, or we need to tiptoe around that idea. Okay, recovered from alcoholism. So there you go. And I don't know whether I'm recovered or not, but I will tell you this. I will claim a statement that it makes later in the book, and we'll come across that here very shortly. So I'm not going to read through the contents, but I'm going to start with the preface. Roman numeral 11. So it says, preface, this is the fourth edition of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. The first edition appeared in April 1939. In the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. The second edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 1,150,000 copies. The third edition, which came off the press in 1976, achieved a circulation of 11,698,000. Okay, so this is an important statement, and I'll bring up another point here. Because this book has become what? The basic text. Okay, so what does the Fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous call their book?
The basic
Basic text. Because this has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholics, there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA program, describing the recovery program. So it's telling you what the first 164 pages do, right? The first portion is the first 164 pages. That is going to describe the AA recovery program. Has been left untouched in the course of revisions made for the second, third, and fourth editions. The section called the Doctor's Opinion has been kept intact just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, our society's great medical benefactor. The second edition added the appendices, the 12 traditions, and the directions for getting in touch with AA. But the chief change was in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect the fellowship's growth. Bill's story, Dr. Bob's Nightmare, and one other personal history from the first edition were retained intact. 3 were edited, and one of these was retitled. New versions of 2 stories were written with new titles. 30 completely new stories were added, and the story section was divided into 3 parts under the same headings that are now used. In the third edition, Part 1, The Pioneers of AA, was left unchanged. 9 of the stories in Part 2, They Stopped in Time, were carried over from the second edition. 8 new stories were added. In Part 3, They Lost Nearly All. 8 stories were retained and 5 new stories were added. New ones were added. The fourth edition includes the 12 concepts for world service and revises the 3 sections of personal stories as follows. One new story has been added to Part 1, and 2 that originally appeared in Part 3 have been repositioned there. 6 stories have been deleted. 6 of the stories in Part 2 have been carried over. 11 new ones have been added, and 11 taken out. Part 3 now includes 12 new stories. 8 were removed in addition to the 2 that were transferred to Part 1. Here's the important part. That was a lot. I know that was a lot of information about the changes that may not be real helpful, but all changes made over the years in the Big Book. AA members' fond nickname for this volume. Anybody know why they call it the Big Book? It's not really that big a book, right? You know what it is? All right, so here's what happened. So in the very beginning, Bill and other members that went to print the Big Book decided that they would use the cheapest, thickest paper that they could find so that the drunkie would really think he was getting something for the money, right? That is why they call it the Big Book, okay?
I thought because they didn't want to confuse it with the good book,
Nah.
Bible.
No, but there were other names that they cut. There were several other names. One was The Way Out. I don't know what the other ones were. I could probably look that up and bring you that information next week. But okay, fond nickname for this volume have had the same purpose. Okay, the changes that they've made have all had the same purpose. To represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately and thereby to reach more alcoholics. So the stories, I believe, that are in the third section now reflect more diversity, racial diversity, sexual identity, that diversity, the diversity of American Indians, of gay women and men, to represent more closely and accurately our society today and our experience in Alcoholics Anonymous. It says, if you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me, or more important, yes, I felt like that, or most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too. Any questions? You guys got any questions at any time? Just, okay.
No, I thought that was helpful though, like, what it says at the end of this, like, yes, I felt like that, and most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too. Like, I know, like, I went over, so I started my steps over, I went over Bill's story with Rich, I think it was yesterday, and like, I did that, like, I highlighted everything that pertained to me, and I went through and just told him everything that pertained to me and how it related to me and stuff like that, and I thought that very useful. I didn't do that the last time.
Good.
Yeah.
Good for you. All right, forward to the first edition. All right, so here's what I claim. All right, so it says, this is the foreword as it appeared in the first printing of the first edition in 1939. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So I don't know if I'm recovered or recovering, but that statement is what I claim, that I've recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. It says, to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. And there's only two places in the book where the book's going to tell you what its purpose is and what it's about. And it's that statement there, and there's one other statement. We can turn to it. It'll be in the chapter to the agnostic, and it'll be on page 45. If you want to turn there, we can do that. Second paragraph, lack of power. Everybody there? Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. So there are two places that I'm aware of. Now, I guess there probably could be more, but I'm aware of two places in the book where the book tells you what its purpose is and what it's about. All right, so back to the foreword. So it says, to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered, precisely, it says, is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope that these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think that this account of our experience will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. It is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry on our occupations in such an event. We would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation. And avocation means it's something that I do in addition to what I do for a vocation. So it's not what I do for a living. It's not my profession. It's not my. It's not what I've been trained to do. It's an avocation. It's in addition to, or aside from, what I do for a vocation. Okay. When writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of the fellowship to omit his personal name, designating himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. We earnestly ask that the press also observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no fees or dues whatsoever. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, nor do we wish to oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced work with other alcoholics. We should like to be helpful to such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, or religious societies will be welcomed. Alcoholics Anonymous. Any questions? Okay. All right, forward to the second edition. Figures given in this forward describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. Since the original foreword of this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. Already, continues the early text, 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities. 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered, there's that word again, recovered alcoholics. Groups are to be found in each of the United States, all of the provinces of Canada. AA has flourishing communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian countries, South America, South Africa, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some of us are just now taking shape in Asia. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning, only the augury of a much larger future ahead. Okay. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group.
Question.
Go ahead.
Augury mean?
Augury, anybody?
It's like sees the future or a sign of the future.
Sign of the future?
Reading the future.
Okay. A telling, a foretelling?
Yeah.
Okay. Next week, I'll bring a dictionary that I have that was copywritten in, I think, 1945. And it's very helpful in understanding some of the terms that are used in the book. I forgot it today, so. All right, the spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck in Akron, Ohio in 1935 between a New York stockbroker, which was Bill Wilson, and an Akron physician, which was Dr. Robert Holbrook Smith. 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience following a meeting with an alcoholic friend, who's Evie Thatcher, who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William B. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. From the doctor, the broker had learned of the grave nature of alcoholism. Though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and the necessity of, it doesn't say if you want to think about believing, it says the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God. Amazing statement, huh? Prior to his journey in Akron, the broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic, but he had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. He suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician. The physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, now think about that. He's not saying here that he gave him this description of alcoholism and all the hope that he had for his recovery. He says he gave him his description of alcoholism and its hopelessness. Think about that. The physician began to pursue the remedy, the spiritual remedy for his malady, with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. He sobered never to drink again up to the moment of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. Anybody want some of that? Anybody want some of that permanent recovery? Yeah, I do. I do. I was so tired of waltzing in and out of here, in and out, and in and out, and in and out. I mean, building it back up, it's like the statement that the book makes later on. It says that the alcoholic uses his gifts and his talents to build up a bright outlook in the future for himself and his family, and pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. I mean, that was the last 12 years of my drinking and using, you know. We'll talk a little bit about Bill and Bob and their meeting. So later we'll see some more of this, but there's a really interesting connection here. When Bill Wilson was approached by Ebby Thatcher, Ebby was a childhood friend of Bill, and we'll read more about that later. But Bill was approached by Ebby. Ebby visited. Ebby had been saved from an alcoholic commitment by the judge by some members of the Oxford group. And these members of the Oxford group had told Ebby, here's what you do. And they told the judge, put him in our care. We'll take care of him. We'll be responsible for him. And so they went through this program with him of on your knees, surrender your will and your life to God, accept Jesus as Lord of your life, okay, and write out your character defects, and we're going to pray to have them removed, and then you're going to make a list of people you have harmed, and you're going to go make amends to these people, and then you're going to go help somebody else. And that's where Ebby was when he met with Bill. And Bill welcomed him. Bill thought, well, I'll let him blow off his steam about telling me about his religious experience, and then I can drink openly with him, But he realized that something really vital had happened for Ebby. Something was different about him. And so that's how Bill received the message of recovery, was from Ebby Thatcher. Bill started on this program of recovery, which wasn't really a program at the time. There were just some things that they had done. Remember, it said over here previously, it said that though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of the need for the moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God. And those are the things that he started doing and carrying the message, And Bill's wife, Lois, said to Bill, she said, you're going to have to help others. In order for this to stick and stay with you, you're going to have to help others. So Bill went to Akron on a business trip. His business fell apart, right? And in fear for a drink, he walked across the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel, and if you ever go to Founders Day, you can still go to this lobby. You can still see the phone that he and the directory, the church directory of names of pastors for all these local churches. Well, he started calling down through this list of numbers for church pastors, looking for a drunk. That's what he wanted. I got to find somebody to help. And he finally gets a hold of Reverend Tunk's secretary, and she says, I got just the guy for you, Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob had been trying to get sober and attending meetings of the Oxford group. Now, isn't this interesting that the Oxford group is what got a hold of Ebby Thatcher in New York, right? I think it was in New York, and gave him the idea for recovery that Ebby took to Bill. Bill, 6 months later, in another city, ends up calling this list of phone numbers, gets a hold of Reverend Tunk's secretary, who knows Henrietta Seiberling, who is part of what they called the Alcoholic Squad for the Oxford group in Akron, And Henrietta's been praying for and working with Dr. Bob and his wife for years for Dr. Bob to try to get sober. So the Oxford group's influence in New York, right, with Bill Wilson and Ebby, and now the Oxford group's influence with Dr. Bob and their introduction to one another through Henrietta Seiberling at the estate at the Gatehouse Lodge. And there's a lot of really neat stuff to do with that story, and I'm not going to go into all that right now, but I just wanted to present what an amazing connection there was there between the Oxford group, between people that were unrelated and didn't know one another. Okay, isn't that kind of
Right,
serendipitous, would we say? Okay. All right. So I'll read that last sentence again because it's such an important sentence. It says, it also indicated that strenuous work, not if you get a chance, not if when you got time, or if you can fit it into your schedule, or when you're not at the gym working out, right? Or when you're not hanging out with your girlfriend. It says strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was what? Vital to permanent recovery. See, if you got what I got, remember how he talked about the hopelessness of his condition, the hopelessness of alcoholism? Well, that's the part that you really got to understand and get a hold of if you're going to make it in this thing, if you got what I got. Because if you don't, you won't put in the work. You won't understand the seriousness of it. Questions? No? All right, let's go on. Hence, the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving at the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. I think that was Bill Dotson. He never had another drink. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. So Bill stayed on with Dr. Bob, okay, for a period of time. Stayed at his house as this thing was emerging and beginning. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first AA group had actually formed, though no one had really realized it at the time, because at the time they were still meeting as the Oxford group and the Alcoholic Squad. A second small group promptly took shape at New York, to be followed in 1937 with the start of a third in Cleveland, and that was the home brewmeister, Clarence Snyder, is the guy that carried the message back to Cleveland from Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob was his sponsor. Lost my place. Besides these, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up on the basic ideas in Akron or New York who were trying to form groups in other cities. By late 1937, the number of members having substantial sobriety and time behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic. Up to this point in time, nothing had had an inkling of success with alcoholism. Do you understand that? Nothing. There was a group called the Washingtonians at one time that had some success with alcoholism, but they became very political and they folded. The Oxford group had, some success, but their tenets were so strict that your average drunkie couldn't accept it. It was too much, it was too religious, it was too Christ-focused for many people. Up to this point, nothing had had a real impact upon alcoholism. I just think that's so significant. It was now time the struggling groups thought to place their message and unique experience before the world. The determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. The membership had then reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. The flying blind period ended, and AA's entered a new phase of its pioneering time. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. In the fall of 1939, Fulton Alster, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics Anonymous and God. This brought a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. See what I'm saying? That sentence. Can you read that sentence? And it's kind of like a run-on sentence. I'm going to back up and read it again. It's difficult to understand sometimes how they wrote, or how he wrote, how Bill wrote, and I'm not sure that Bill wrote all of the forwards here or anything like that. I'm not sure how they came to be exactly, but each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found, to the astonishment of everyone, that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. So, why write a book? One, to document in clarity, without exception, precisely how we recovered, number one. Two is, this is the 12th step of Alcoholics Anonymous. The book was written to carry the message to the alcoholic that still suffers. That's its real purpose. Okay? And it was found that you could mail a book to a man or a woman in California, and they could read the book and go through the process of the steps and carry that message to someone else. That was possible, and that is what started happening. This was is that where I'm at? No, in the spring. Okay, I'm sorry. This is a good part. In the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends, to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. News of this got out to the world wires. Inquiries poured in, and again, many people went to the bookstores to get the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. Tell you a story about Rockefeller. Bill and others visited Rockefeller hoping to get a big check from Mr. Rockefeller to build. They wanted to build hospitals. They wanted to publish this book, build hospitals. Bill had grand ideas about what he was going to do with this thing, okay? And Rockefeller came back to him and he said, no, fellas, he says, I'm afraid money will louse this thing up. And he denied them the money that they were asking for, and I don't know what that figure was, but it was substantial, and I think he gave them just a few $1,000s instead. Sorry. So, by March of 1941, the membership had shot up to 2,000. Then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. By the close of 1941, remember in the beginning it says we need to remain anonymous at this point because of the overwhelming response that could occur? Well, this is what started happening when these articles started hitting the wire and being printed. They were deluged, it says. And it says, by the close of 1941, AA members numbered 8,000 members. The mushrooming process was in full swing. AA had become a national institution. Somebody give me the time.
34.
34? Good. All right. Our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this: could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership, and money? Would there be strivings for power or prestige? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? And so soon, AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. Yeah, I mean, there were talks and there was controversy about, there was racial conflict. It was like, we can't let black people in this thing. We can't let women in this thing. No, I mean, these were honest problems that this thing faced in the beginning. Okay? It says, but out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. As we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society, that our leaders might serve but never govern, that each group was to be autonomous, which means self-governing, and there was to be no professional class of therapy. There were to be no fees or dues. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. There was to be the least possible organization, even in the service centers. Our public relations were to be based upon attraction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be autonomous at the level of press, radio, and films. Anonymous, I'm sorry, at the level of press, radio, and films. And I'm going to bring you another thing that I think it comes from Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, where Bill had written and stated that it's as much a breach of tradition to not share our last names amongst each other. It's as much a breach of tradition as it is to share your last name at the level of press, radio, and films. And I'll bring that here. I'll try to do that next week. So it was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, and films, and in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter public controversies. This was the substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in full on page 561 of this book. Though none of these principles had the force of rules or laws, they had become so widely accepted by 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international convention held in Cleveland. Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest aspects that our society has. While the internal difficulties of our adolescent period were being ironed out, public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were two principal reasons: the large numbers of recoveries and the reunited homes. So that's the greatest publication, that's the greatest advertisement that we have, is the number of recoveries and the reunited homes. These made their impressions everywhere. Of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program, but great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed. Another reason for the wide acceptance of AA was the ministrations of friends in medicine, religion, and the press, together with innumerable others who became our able and persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have made only the slowest progress. Some of the recommendations of AA's early medical and religious friends will be found further on in this book. One of the first ones we'll read is by Dr. William Silkworth, The Doctor's Opinion. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organization. Neither does AA take any particular medical point of view, though we cooperate widely with men of medicine as well as with men of religion. Alcohol being no respecter of persons. We are an accurate cross-section of America. And in distant lands, the same democratic evening up process is now going on. By personal religious affiliation, we include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. More than 15% of us are women. At present, our membership is pyramiding at a rate of about 20% a year. So far, upon the total problem of several million actual or potential alcoholics in the world, we have made only a scratch. In all probability, we shall never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcohol problem in all of its ramifications. Upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly. Yet, it is our great hope that all those who have as yet found no answer may begin to find one in the pages of this book and will presently join us on the high road to new freedom. I think it's interesting that it uses that phrase again, because we read that often at the closing of a meeting. We read that, what's the last paragraph of A Vision for You, right? Or last four or five paragraphs. And it says, join us, right? It says, join us again. I like that. So, questions, comments? All right. There's not too much in the next couple of forewords, but I'll go ahead and read them anyways. By the March of 1976, this is the foreword to the third edition. When this edition went up to the printer, the total worldwide membership of Alcoholics Anonymous was conservatively estimated at more than 1 million, with almost 28,000 groups meeting in over 90 countries. Surveys of groups in the United States and Canada indicate that AA is reaching out not only to more and more people, but to a wider and wider range. Women now make up more than 1/4 of the membership. The last printing said, 15%, so now it's 25% in the third edition printing. Among newer members, the proportion is nearly 1/3. 7% of AAs surveyed are now less than 30 years of age. Among them, many in their teens. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and made my first meeting in 1980, 40 and 45 was young in Alcoholics Anonymous. It really was. Yeah, I was 19. There weren't too many 19-year-olds. The basic principles of the AA program, it appears, hold good for individuals with many different lifestyles, just as the program has brought recovery to those of many different nationalities. The 12 steps that summarize the program may be called Los Dos Pasos, I think in one country, Les Doce Estapes in another, but they trace exactly the same path to recovery that was blazed by the earliest members of Alcoholics Anonymous. In spite of the great increase in the size and the span of this fellowship, at its core it remains simple and personal. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. All right, forward to the fourth edition. This fourth edition of Alcoholics Anonymous came off the press in 2001 at the start of a new millennium. And I'll just share this. I think I remember they started talking about the fourth edition in about 2000, well, let's see, it says came off in 2001. I think they started working on it in 98. So it took 3 years for them to make that revision and that process. Nothing happens fast in Alcoholics Anonymous. Since the third edition was published in 1976, worldwide membership of AA has just about doubled to an estimated 2 million or more, with nearly 100,800 groups meeting in approximately 150 countries around the world. Literature has played a major role in AA's growth, and a striking phenomenon of the past quarter century has been the explosion of the translations of our basic literature into many language and dialects. In country after country where the AA seed was planted, it has taken root, slowly at first, then growing by leaps and bounds when literature has become available. Currently, Alcoholics Anonymous has been translated into 43 languages. As the message of recovery has reached larger numbers of people, it has also touched the lives of vastly greater variety of suffering alcoholics. when the phrase, "we are people who normally would not mix," page 17 of this book, was written in 1939, it referred to a fellowship composed largely of men and a few women with quite similar social, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. Like so much of AA's basic text, those words have proved to be far more visionary than the founding members could ever have imagined. The stories added to this edition represent a membership whose characteristics of age, gender, race, and culture have widened and have deepened to encompass growth inherent. To encompass virtually everyone the first 100 members could have hoped to reach. While our literature has preserved the integrity of AA, the message sweeping changes in society as a whole are reflected in new customs and practices within the fellowship. Taking advantage of technological advances, for example, AA members with computers can now participate in meetings online, sharing with fellow alcoholics across the country or around the world. I mean, isn't it interesting that we're reading this now, and for those of you that might view this later, we're in the beginnings of the epidemic and the pandemic coronavirus situation, and these are our meetings today, virtual meetings. We have very few face-to-face meetings that are occurring today, and of course at this time it's March 26th of 2020. So it's interesting that the preface or the foreword makes mention of that. Fundamentally, though, the difference between an electronic meeting and the home group around the corner is only one of format. In any meeting, anywhere, AAs share experience, strength, and hope with each other in order to stay sober and help other alcoholics. Modem to modem or face to face, AA speak the language of the heart in all of its power and simplicity. So, questions, comments? Time we got?
47.
All right, good deal. All right, well, let's start into the doctor's opinion. This is probably one of my favorite readings in the whole book, is the doctor's opinion. It's one of the most profound in the explanation of alcoholism for me, one of the most valuable, and I feel like if you don't get certain ideas that Dr. Silkworth is trying to convey, I think it would be hard to build a solid foundation of recovery. So, I'll start. Doctor's opinion. We of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in this book. So that's the first thing that I would point out, is that it's making mention that there's a plan of recovery that's described in this book. Okay? Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have had experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed our return to health. I think you could call that recovery, our return to health, you know. A well-known doctor, chief physician at a nationally prominent hospital specializing in alcoholism and drug addiction. Wait a minute. This is 1935? What's he talking about here? Specializing in alcoholic and drug addiction. So, you think there was no drug addiction in 1935, 1920, 29, 35, 39? That's not what I'm reading. It says drug addiction gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. To whom it may concern, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended a patient, though he had been a competent businessman of good earnings capacity, was an alcoholic of the type I had come to regard as hopeless. There's that hopeless idea again, okay? Right? Hopeless. Hopeless state of mind and body, it says. In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. Okay? He's talking about Bill Wilson and Ebby's ideas that he transmitted to him. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and of their families. This man and over 100 others appear to have what? Recovered. There's that word again. Man, you can't get away from it. I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods had failed completely. These facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth inherent in this group, that they may mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. These men may well have a remedy for thousands of such cases. You may rely absolutely on anything that they say about themselves. That's a pretty powerful statement, isn't it? You may rely absolutely upon anything that they say about themselves. Very truly yours, William D. Silkworth. So, go ahead.
So when he's saying you may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves, is he talking about like their recovered part?
I think in relationship to their experience, strength, and hope. That would be my belief. Now, I don't know that you would want to take, medical, psychological, or spiritual advice from all of them independently of, of people that are professionals in that field, but anything that they say about themselves, and I think I believe that they're talking about relative to their alcoholism and their recovery from alcoholism. So, all right. So the physician who at our request gave us this letter has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or were outright mental defectives. I find that humorous. These things were true to some extent, in fact, to a considerable extent with some of us, but we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out the physical factor is incomplete. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may of course mean little, but as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. Though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as the altruistic plane, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. More often than not, go ahead.
Altruistic.
Altruistic means you're doing something for someone else with no motive or profit motive, with no payoff, no profit motive. You're not looking to get something back. Altruism, yeah, out of the kindness of your heart, goodwill, yeah, altruistic. And and hold on to that, because let's look that up next week when I bring the dictionary. Okay. Altruistic plane, we favor hospitalization, and more often than not, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached, as he has then a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. Time we got?
6:54.
54? All right. I want to stop there because the next letter is probably one of the most powerful pieces for me of this book, and I'd like to give it the time that it deserves, and we're coming up on the hour, and I think it would be a good place to stop. Everybody agree? Anybody got any questions, observations, thoughts? What do you think?
I just had a thought like that very last paragraph that it read, like
we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged, and then it goes on to say like it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached. Like that's exactly what happened to me. Like I got sober for like a week or so, and then they told me like, hey, you should probably seek treatment for it. Like if they would have told me day one of being sober, like I probably wouldn't have stuck with it.
Yeah.
Like it took like the entire week to figure out like, hey, that's probably a good idea.
I think another way that relates too is like I was brought up in Alcoholics Anonymous by men that taught me that if somebody calls you and they've been drinking or like on a relapse and they've been drinking, you tell them, I'm sorry, I want to help you and I want to be helpful. Go to sleep, get up in the morning without a drink, decide whether you want to be sober or not, and call me back. But I don't talk to an active drunk.
Altruistic, showing a disinterested and selfless concern for the well-being of others. Unselfish.
Okay.
Something that struck me about this whole thing that we read is that how the Oxford group helped, what's his name, Evie, and Evie helped Dr. Bill
Bill Wilson.
Yeah, Bill Wilson, but the Oxford group couldn't get through Dr. Bob.
Henrietta had been trying to help and been praying for Dr. Bob for years. He had been struggling. Yeah.
And it kind of just stuck out to me how one man took what he learned from the same group that was trying to help that individual, kind of warped it a little bit, and then he was able to get it the way Bill was giving it to him.
Right. So it says that this also proves that one alcoholic can influence or help another alcoholic as no non-alcoholic can.
Yeah.
Here's the translation. It is a term used to describe a behavior characterized by acts with no apparent benefits for the individual who performs them, but that are beneficial to other individuals.
Right.
Humans may designate a selfish love of others. That is to say, the wish that others find happiness and generosity, expecting nothing in return.
Right. Great. Good job. Right. Anything else?
I want to agree with what Red just said about a man's brain be cleared before he's approached. Basically, speaking of detox,
Yeah.
get through the process of detox, of the withdrawals, of that before you start hitting the deep psychological and spiritual issues.
Yep.
You're not going to retain it.
And that's what Bill and Bob did in the beginning. Was they visited the hospital where not Mother Teresa, what was her name? The Catholic nun, Sister Ignatius. Sister Ignatius worked in the alcoholism treatment unit or worked with drunks. Here's how it happened. In the beginning, I don't think they treated alcoholics at the hospital in Akron. So there was a floor, I think it was a 6th floor or something like that, that was not built out or under construction. And they made that into a detox in the beginning. And she would sneak men up there and detox them on that floor. And Bill and Bob would meet with them or Dr. Bob later and 12-step them right then and there.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
Just coming from the treatment center I came from, you see, I saw that a lot. I did try to do it when I first got in there, trying to make all these decisions and feel like I've got to do this and I've got to make amends and I've got in that initial period of detox. And that's not wise at all.
Yeah.
It's not on straight yet.
Go straight to step 8 as soon as you detox.
Keep us going.
All right. Well, thank you guys for being here, and thank you for those of you that have joined us online. And we'll end for today, and we'll be back next week. Good night.